Slowly.
We've lost the focus of our video.
Hey everybody, so I'm glad you guys could all be here tonight for my final speech. So before I get started, I'm going to give you guys a little short story about my life. I grew up in some of you might know this, but I grew up in a small neighborhood called Five Oaks. The street I lived on was Kenilworth Avenue. Still remember to this day. It's the street that I was born in and I lived on for a couple of years. The street that I lived on, or the area I lived on, Five Oaks, was situated right outside of North Dayton, Ohio. So it was really close to the city. One of the first initial memories that I have of Kenilworth and Five Oaks growing up was these giant brick walls that had the giant Five Oaks logo on them. Growing up, I didn't really pay much attention to them, but I did notice them, and I always thought they were kind of weird. Later on in life, when I got a little bit older, I started asking questions about them. One of the first things I asked my parents about them was why they were there, and they kind of just gave general answers, but eventually they finally told me that they were used basically to stop drugs from coming into the neighborhood. Now that was something that was really weird to me, and then I started thinking about it, and then I researched and looked into it, and I found that at the time Five Oaks had a really big drug issue, so they put up giant walls that cover half of a block so that actual cars couldn't peddle large amounts of drugs into the neighborhood. That was something that stuck with me for a while, and something that's been part of me for a little while because I grew up with it. I couldn't leave my neighborhood, let alone my own house, because the fear of running into a drug dealer or something like that. However, the walls were put up just to stop drugs, but in reality, in the long haul, it didn't really do much for it. In fact, it actually made things worse. It made people more isolated. And now, if you drive into the Five Oaks area, it's one of the most crime-ridden and poor neighborhoods in all of Dayton, Ohio. So that was my first time meeting people and the things that tried to stop drugs and drug use. And people nowadays are looking at that and how those methods that were used back then, and they're realizing that it's not really working anymore. It's trying to stop drugs by just walling it down and completely just barricading it. There's a growing movement within the United States for more smart drug regulation from a legislative point and from a relationship standpoint. One of those movements is for the actual legalization of certain drugs. One drug that in particular that we're going to be talking about today is cannabis, or marijuana as it's typically referred to. I myself am for the legalization of marijuana for a variety of reasons. But before we get started with that, I want to discuss the history of cannabis use. I feel like people aren't enlightened enough about it. So the history of cannabis starts about 5,000, 6,000 years ago. The first records of the use of cannabis was in the country of China. The royal families there would use them for medicinal purposes. The first time that we saw cannabis use in the North American region was usually, I believe, the 1500s. And it was during this time that cannabis was used for a variety of different things. It was used for hemp rope, paper, clothing, a variety of different things. It wasn't until the 1930s and the turn of the 20th century that we started to see actual legal legislation banning the drug itself. The first time that laws came into place to ban it was in the southern states. During this time, there was a large immigration of Hispanic and Mexican immigrants. The middle and upper class citizens at the time were very scared of this immigration. Many of them had prejudice towards these immigrants. So they wanted laws that kind of just got them out of the states. One of the laws that was put into place, and what they didn't realize at the time, but this would be a catalyst for several other laws, was a law banning the use of and possession of cannabis. At the time, many Hispanic and Mexican immigrants would use it for medicinal and recreational purposes. So if you caught a couple of ignorant immigrants trying to come over with dope on them, it was either to send them back home. This law was based on prejudice and other racial biases. So it was kind of one of the first laws that showed why prohibition and criminalization of cannabis was really not the greatest thing. The main person I want to talk about when it comes to the history of cannabis and banning it is Harry J. Anslinger. he was the head of the Department of Prohibition. During this time, prohibition on alcohol had just been lifted. So the department was kind of useless, and they needed something to do, otherwise they were probably going to get taken down. Harry J. Anslinger came up with the idea of banning marijuana. At this time, he believed that marijuana and cannabis was a blight to society, even though only upper class citizens were using it at the time. And so he came up with the idea of coming up with propaganda saying that marijuana made people angry and crazy, and it worked successfully. Laws were put into place that are still in today that effectively banned the possession and selling of marijuana. So with this history, you can see that marijuana in general had a bad rep from the beginning that's stuck with it for a while now. Now, the actual prohibition and how it's affected the USA has had clear and short disastrous effects. Over the past 4 decades, the U.S. has spent over $1 trillion in resources and needed to combat drug use and drug crime in the United States. However, in 2014 alone, there were over 2 million people incarcerated. Over a million and a half of those prisoners were on drug-related charges, and over 700,000 of those people were marijuana-related offenses. In 2016 alone, half of the arrests had been for drug offenses. And there have been signs from the Federal Bureau of Justice showing that incarceration has gone up, not down. So if we clearly see that drug offenses are one of the most common ones that people get arrested for and that it's going up, we're mostly just incarcerating people, but we're not actually solving the actual issue itself. Equities.com writer Ryan Bahari wrote an article suggesting how much the youth would actually save if we instead focused on making nonviolent drug offenses not criminalized. He's calculated about $9.3 billion in nonviolent drug offenses if we got rid of them. Drugpolicy.com. That's going to be a website I'm going to be citing a lot in my discussion. They found that the U.S. could make around $46.7 billion with legalizing current legal drugs like marijuana. So, prohibition clearly doesn't actively stop drug use. What does, however, is regulation. These two graphs, I'm going to be talking about them later. But one of the clear discussions and arguments people are making is that regulation actively helps combat and stop drug use. And what it does is that it limits the age and what people focus on. Marijuana has a clear effect on teenagers and young adults. And that's the group that I feel like most people who want clear regulation, they want to focus on helping those people and making sure that those people don't actually get involved in these drugs. So what it does is that it limits who is allowed to use these drugs. These are two statistics from responsibility.org, and they're studies of alcohol use by 8th graders and 10th graders, from past month drinking to binge drinking. These statistics show that with regulation, there has been a clear decline in use by teenagers of these substances. What most regulators want to do is they want to apply these same laws to marijuana, making it regulated, but then setting a limit for when marijuana is used by citizens. This allows people and programs to focus on curbing when people use these drugs and not prohibiting it completely. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is the, not myth, but the imperfection in the idea of the gateway drug. The gateway drug is simply a drug that people take. It's usually one of the first drugs that they'll take, and what it does is it gives them a light high that makes them feel as if they can go on to do harder drugs. Marijuana has been linked to causing alcoholism, use in cocaine and meth and crystal meth and those sorts of drugs. And there are studies showing that it does have that effect. National Epidemiologic Study found that adults who use marijuana first go on and have a likelier chance of having an alcohol disorder later on. Also, marijuana has been found to be served as a primer. Now, what that means is that it allows your body to become desensitized to certain drugs. So when you go on, your next high won't be as great, and you'll want to do more and more. And that's where the addiction comes into place. Now, while that is true and legit, what it actually means is that marijuana, along with other substances such as alcohol and tobacco, which are legal in the United States, it makes you desensitized. So all it really is doing is that it's making you more susceptible later on, but it doesn't actually make you addicted. Okay, and then the studies that found that marijuana can be used as a primer were studies on rodents and not actual human beings, because there's such limited scientific study on humans that we really don't know the negative and positive effects just yet, just basic research right now. So I've shown you why prohibition hasn't really affected the communities as much, but with legalizing it and making it ready for adults who are of a legal age, there have been positive signs. Colorado and Washington are two states in mind that had studies conducted on them discussing the legal effects and how it has helped. From an economic standpoint, the tax revenue that Washington got just in 1 year was around $80 million in tax revenue from the sale of marijuana. Colorado had around $30-40 million, so these are decent numbers just starting off with. At the same time, crime rates in particular places such as marijuana and drug offenses has gone down tremendously over time. I think in this it says about 60%, something like that. So there is a clear drop in crime. Crime that is not drug related has stayed steady, and teen usage of illicit drugs such as marijuana has stayed steady. So in just a year's study, there isn't an increase in crime, as some people might say. On top of that, the biggest reason for legalizing marijuana is the medicinal purposes. As I've stated before, the Chinese in the Chinese royalty used marijuana for medicinal purposes. That's always been the clear indicator. The National Institute of Drug Abuse has found that chemicals in the marijuana, such as THC, help with nausea from chemotherapy. They also help with inflammation and in general just pain, because the chemical helps relax the sensors in your body so your body doesn't so susceptible to pain. More research is needed, but medical marijuana has been started to use on other diseases such as AIDS, Alzheimer's, and MS. So there's a clear indicator that these drugs and research in these drugs could yield actual medicine that could help with diseases such as AIDS or cancer. Now, I've talked about different things and how prohibition does work, legalizing can work, but how does it actually, on a federal level, how does it get legalized? And the way it's set up, using regulations from alcohol and tobacco and from how Colorado and Washington have also set up their own system, I found that the best way to do it would be to, one, cannabis would become legal to purchase in small quantities and be able to sell and distribute domestically within the United States borders. So you don't want to sell it outside, but you want to sell it inside. 2, the legal age to purchase and sell cannabis would be at the age of 21. This is the same rule in Colorado and Washington and the District of Columbia. This sets a limit. At this point, most people are adults and their bodies have grown and fully developed, so it won't affect their body the same way as if you were a developing body. 3, business and dispensaries of cannabis will have to be federally licensed for a certain quantity of THC. So similar to how we have alcohol stores for harder alcohol, and they're federally regulated and they're licensed, showing that they have gone through rigorous education and procedures. This makes it more legit, so you're not selling drugs that might be laced to citizens. And 4th, there will be a federal tax and sale on purchased cannabis similar to alcohol and tobacco. Simply put, you need a revenue. That's a big reason behind this, because if you're going to tax a drug, you might as well be you're going to selling a drug, you might as well tax it to get something back to help the community. And 5th, these taxes and from the sale and purchase of cannabis will go for a variety of programs, including funding for scientific research on cannabis and its medical benefits, as well as funding police forces and other civil services. The tax revenue that comes from selling cannabis in Colorado goes for the funding of schools in the city. So that creates a direct helping of schools and improving school. So that's something that we can do with a federal legalization of marijuana. It's my hope that later on in life that more people realize that you help regulate and you help make clear what is needed within a community and not prohibit things. I don't want to see walls put up again in my neighborhood when I was growing up. So I hope that later on in life that people will be able to research into it more and realize that we can come together and make good truck policies. Thank you.